Joining us now, Ashley Edwards, coastal Mississippi entrepreneur and a SuperTalk Mississippi news column contributor. All right, Ashley, we saw it all unfold last night for 2 hours. For those of us who are political junkies, it was, I guess, the drug we've been waiting for to kick off the presidential election season. I read your article. I largely agreed with you, and I will say that, and I think this is what you were trying to say, and then I'll be quiet and let you and tell us in your own words what it was. But I said earlier, I thought Nikki Haley performed better than any of the candidates relative to expectations, and I thought that her stock went up more than any other candidate. I've been a fan of Vivek Ramaswamy for some time. I got, I guess, first introduced to Mr. Ramaswamy when he wrote the book Woke Inc., and that was in 2020. And he started exposing all this ridiculous DEI stuff that had just gripped corporate America. And ever since then, I've been a fan, and I've read both his books, Nation of Victims, another great one that aligns very closely with my views from a cultural perspective. But I thought he got a little snarky last night, honestly. And I don't know that he helped his cause. But go ahead and tell us what your thoughts were and if I kind of interpreted your article accurately.
I think you're completely accurate on that, Gerard. I think you're right. It's all sort of a relative metric of who has the most to gain, who has the most to lose, how do they perform relative to that. When you judge it by that, I think Nikki Haley probably did the most to help herself last night. You know, let's not forget, Nikki Haley was one of the first candidates in this race and has been almost not talked about at all for months and months now. She had really sort of solidified her place amongst the also-rans. You did not hear Nikki Haley's name on any of the national news or cable news shows. And that really all changed as a result of that debate performance. And so when you judge it relative to who was getting the attention before the debate kicked off last night and who was getting the attention afterwards, I think she did the most to help herself. Ramaswamy, it was really his coming out party in a lot of ways. I mean, you've mentioned before that he's been rising up the polls. You know, I think he's sort of the unknown commodity in the race. He's got a following online, people like you who have read his books, who watch his videos, and they know him very well. But I think last night was his introduction to the broader party. And if you're his camp, I think you walk away very happy with his performance too, because it got attention. You know, he's being talked about. You know, what's the saying? Just make sure you spell my name right. I mean, all publicity is good publicity at this point in the campaign. So, but I tell you, the thing that really struck me, Gerard, watching it unfold last night, and I don't think you can overstate how important it is and how much it changes the dynamic to see those candidates on a stage standing next to each other, engaging with each other. It just takes on a totally different tone, a totally different feel than the normal campaign trail stuff. And so, you know, it was interesting to kind of watch that dynamic and who sort of solidified themselves. I will tell you, I disagree with almost the entirety of the national media. I don't think Trump helped himself by not being there, because it's the first time that I remember in 8 years when there was a discussion about conservative policies and conservative politics without Donald Trump being at the center of all of it. And so I think in a campaign where attention, exposure is incredibly important, I don't know that Trump did himself any favors. I also don't know that he really hurt himself a lot either, because, you know, he's already in the lead by such a large majority or such a large margin in the polls. You know, really he only has things to lose at this point. But I don't think it necessarily helped him not being there. And it's going to give some of these other candidates an opportunity to find their own lane.
I think that's right. I see the deck reshuffling, but I certainly don't think we could conclude from last night, oh, well, candidate X is going to really ascend in the polls and overtake Donald Trump. I don't see that. I think many in the country, long before anybody announced, thought, hey, looks like Ron DeSantis is going to come in with a bang and really probably overtake Trump. But he's been a disappointment. I mean, let's just be honest about it. Thus far, he's a person who's turned over his staff. He's got plenty of money. That's not the issue. I think he may have more in his campaign war chest than anybody on the stage, if I'm not mistaken. So that's not an issue. And he's got a resume certainly to run on. But the thing, so I didn't come away thinking, well, DeSantis really helped himself a great deal. I didn't feel like, well, yeah, he was clearly the outstanding candidate. And if anything, I'll just point this out, Ashley, and see what you think. The only person that smiled and laughed a bit was Vivek. The rest of them are just so stuffed shirty, and DeSantis just looks like he's angry all the time. And I heard an interview, I talked about this earlier, I heard an interview with Jason Chaffetz, who served with him in the Congress, the congressman from Utah, who said, well, if you're looking for somebody to have a sense of humor and smile, the interviewer asking about that sort of personality trait of DeSantis, he said, he ain't your guy. He wasn't that way when he was in the Congress. Now, to some people, that may not be important, but he just seems like he's a little angry in his delivery. It's not that his points or that the substance of his discussions or his comments are wrong or not appealing to, I think, a typical Republican voter. It's just the delivery, I think, lacks.
Look, I think that he's not a great retail politician, and I think that's kind of been known. But on a debate stage, when charisma and sort of the skill in retail politics comes out in full force, it just wasn't there, especially when you contrast it with someone like Ramaswamy. And, the irony of all this is, Gerard, Donald Trump was sort of tweeting the things that Ramaswamy was saying, cheering him on all last night. Of course, Trump has not been friendly to DeSantis in quite some time.
Right.
And the interesting thing about it is all three of those candidates really occupy the same space in the race. And it's almost like what Trump is not sort of fully seeing, or maybe he does see it and he just doesn't care because he thinks his lead is good enough. But Ramaswamy is not taking non-Trump votes away from other folks. He's taking Trump votes away from Trump. And so
I agree.
It leads to some questions about where is the ceiling for DeSantis, Trump, and Ramaswamy, considering they're all kind of occupying this same political space. And so I really saw the debate as this contrast between the MAGA candidates, if you will, Trump, Ramaswamy, and DeSantis, and then the others, of which I think Haley was the strongest. Surprisingly, I don't think anybody expected that Haley would that kind of hay.
Yeah, and so I wonder, Ashley, it's been no secret that Ramaswamy has said, hey, if I'm elected, I would pardon Donald Trump, and he also made it very clear if he's the nominee, I'm all in behind him. And that question was asked, as you recall. It was a very relevant and pointed question, was asked of the entire group. Raise your hand if you would support Donald Trump if he's the nominee. And Ramaswamy's hand went up. I mean, he jumped off the stage, looked like the eager beaver in the classroom, ooh, 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 I know the answer sort of deal. And did you notice, though, that there was two candidates that did not raise their hand? That was Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie. Expected. They made that clear. But it was DeSantis who looked around. Did you notice that? I'm going to look over here and see what the other ones do before I raise my hand. And then he kind of timidly raised it, I guess. And I just wonder if Donald Trump's not picking up on that. He's a very good scorekeeper. You know that. Who's with me, who's against me. Maybe one of the best in terms of politicians. And so Ramaswamy was, all over that. I'll also point this out, that Pence attacked him. You're a rookie, and then Haley said, you don't know anything about foreign policy. And he was laughing back at him. I mean, okay, Mike, okay, Nikki. I mean, he was laughing in the face of their criticism, which I think just shows what a good demeanor he has. But he did get a little snarky somewhat. I don't think he helped his cause that. I think Doug Burgum is qualified and smart a guy and is the richest guy, by the way, on the stage last night. I think he's done. I think Asa Hutchins is done. I just think that the donors are going to shut down on them, and I don't know that Asa doesn't have any money personally, and I just don't know that Burgum will keep dumping his own money in the deal. We'll catch your thoughts on this on the other side of the break. We got Ashley Edwards, Coastal Mississippi entrepreneur and SuperTalk Mississippi News columnist. We're coming to the studio. We're chatting with Ashley Edwards from the Mississippi Gulf Coast entrepreneur and a columnist for SuperTalk Mississippi News, talking about last night's debate. So I don't know that anybody made any significant encroachment on Donald Trump's lead. Ashley, what do you think?
No, I agree with that. I think that it's going to take consolidation of candidates before Iowa to see anybody that has a shot at really challenging him. DeSantis is just backsliding in the polls. If you're in DeSantis's campaign, you got to take a long inward look and really ask yourself, are we going to keep doing what we're doing and think that we're going to get a different outcome? I mean, this is not going well for DeSantis, considering where it all began for him. I think Ramaswamy is going to see a bump after last night. I think you'll see that. What's going to be interesting is kind of figuring out where his ceiling is. Is it 10%? Is it 12%? I think Haley will see a bump, but that might mean going from 3 to 6 or 3 to 7% in the polls. So nobody really is encroaching on Trump's space right now in this race, and it's going to take a lot of consolidation. Now, I do see a path for that. I mean, you look at Nikki Haley's campaign, for example. It is a sophisticated, sharp campaign infrastructure that looks like a presidential campaign. And she certainly has the ability to do some massive fundraising over time if the field consolidates. And so as someone that could be there, be relatively well-financed by the GOP establishment, I think she's got a shot. Tim Scott has kind of occupied that lane.
Yeah.
DeSantis is going to have to get a shot in the arm. And it feels like Ramaswamy is really running to be Trump's chief surrogate and potential VP pick, which based on the just the good feelings and the tweets that Trump has made with kind of applauding Ramaswamy. I mean, I think right now, if you were an odds maker, you'd say, who's the vice presidential pick? I'd say it's Ramaswamy today.
Yeah, I'd put Haley in that camp as well, maybe behind him. And, it may be kind of a diversity play with Haley. Right. You get an Indian American and a female. I mean, there may be something to that. And someone who has a breadth of certainly foreign policy experience that she would bring to the table. But I'm with you. We'll see where that goes. Now, there was a question asked of the candidates if they thought that their fellow candidate, former Vice President Mike Pence, acted appropriately on January 6th. And I believe every one of them said they did, that they supported his actions, that the Constitution comes above anything else when you're serving in that capacity. Is that what you saw? Were you surprised at that, or did that come out the way you thought?
I was surprised that Mike Pence was so savvy to sort of, raise the previous question to all the folks on stage and say, either stand beside me or disagree with me, but do it here publicly in the debate. Yeah. And it was interesting the range of responses you saw. Chris Christie giving this full-throated endorsement of what Mike Pence did, and DeSantis sort of saying, yeah, he did his duty, but, we got bigger fish to fry. So it was interesting to see that contrast. But I think questions like that really went to the heart of what's going to become the substance of this 2024 GOP race. And that is, there is clearly an ideological war going on in the Republican Party. You get that more sort of traditional, compassionate conservatism that you would have seen in the Bush era with candidates like Haley. You get the full-throated support of the MAGA movement from candidates like DeSantis and Ramaswamy. And those two things really don't mesh very well together. And so you sort of got this search for the GOP's identity going forward. And even listening to the reactions from the audience in the debate, it's pretty clear that there's just not a majority of the Republican Party that happens to feel real strongly about any one of these positions. And so I think it was really, it was very telling from that perspective.
Yeah, it was kind of patchy applause.
Yes.
and if you will, and jeers. I mean, sort of patchy. It wasn't like, oh yeah, that's the entire complement of people in attendance. Wasn't that? It was like they're planted people whenever they'd do well or respond or throw a zinger or two out there. Another controversial issue, of course, that certainly could be front and center in the 24 election was abortion. You can't overlook that. And my takeaway from there, something I've said many times on the show here for a while, Ashley, is that if you believe that life begins at conception, which I think historically Republicans have, and that's been their stance and their standard for being pro-life, there's nobody on the stage that supports policies that align with that. Mike Pence, even as an evangelical Christian, a few weeks ago, he came out and said, yeah, I'm going to push for a 15-week federal ban. On the other hand, you had DeSantis, who just signed off on legislation in his state of Florida to limit the gestation period to 6 weeks. And when he was asked about that, he said, well, I'll just say I'm pro-life. I mean, he was kind of non-committal on that. And Nikki Haley said, guys, you're crazy. We're not going to get anything through the U.S. Senate without 60 votes, and that's just not happening at the federal level. Let's allow it to be decided at the states per the Dobbs decision. The Democrats are going to make a much bigger deal out of this, are they not? They see this as their path to victory in both houses and the White House.
No question. Every Democrat strategist in America is telling their candidate right now, if you're in a district that is uncomfortable with the current positions on abortion with the GOP, hammer them on that issue. And they're seeing that it's becoming a winning issue for them. You see what's happened in these last several state referendums. I really felt like it was notable that Haley tried to carve out what is a difficult position, but I thought was a really strategic one in both saying I'm unabashedly pro-life and I'm also very pragmatic about this issue. And so, what she kept, I think, showing last night was a real grasp of understanding of what it takes to win the general election. Of course, the problem is she's got to win the Republican primary, which is a little bit of a different set of questions for these candidates. But she kept kind of moving back to what's a center-right position that I can defend in a general election scenario. You didn't really see any of the other candidates, I think, taking that tack. Perhaps DeSantis a little bit by just sort of shrugging off the question. But it was pretty clear that Haley knows where the American electorate is on that issue and is trying to find her space in that issue.
Yeah, I agree. And she was also a person that I think tapped into the fact that she's a female and made the case that we got to take care of mothers and children. And she was the only one that really made any points about that. It's fine to be pro-life, but we got to do that. Our Attorney General, Lynn Fitch, has been a crusader in that regard as well, before and after the Dobbs issue. So, but we'll see. I still believe Burgum and Asa Hutchinson are out at this point. I would be shocked if they even stay in up to the primary. The caucus, the Iowa caucus, as it will be, coming up after the first of the year. I'd be shocked if they stick around for that. But what will be fun to watch is just how the fundraising goes, right? Because that's what this is all about. Is you got to have money to have staying power, and these donors watch very carefully these performances in the debates and then the post-debate polls and so forth. And they'll make a decision as to whether or not to keep hitting the hip and contributing. I noticed that I'm on Vivek's email list. He was sending out fundraising emails during the debate, because I got one during the debate, which was actually fairly clever. He just seems like the only one on the stage is having fun, for what that's worth. I think he kind of knows deep down inside his prospects are fairly much a long shot, but at least he had fun, and I like to see that. I think that is necessary. I think back to Ronald Reagan on how he had fun in every debate, and I think that carried him a long way. Got about a minute left. Your final thoughts, Ash?
Well, I think in any debate, you can tell who the other candidates are worried about based on who they target. And
Yeah.
I would have predicted going into last night that would have been DeSantis, and it was Ramaswamy. And so I think
Yeah.
that really underscores the fact that he's a threat. They see what's happening with him in the polls, and they're trying to catch that same magic. And so they went after him hard, and I think you'll see more of the same in the weeks ahead. I think he's going to be a key target for some of the guys that are on the periphery.
Totally agree. Always good to talk to you, Ashley. Great analysis, great article. Really enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon.
My pleasure, Gerard. Thank you for having me today.
Yes, sir. Take care. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.